Okay, I'm going to be rating and discussing every Defect card in Slay the Spire, but there's a plot twist, which is that I suck at Slay the Spire, or at least I don't think I'm a very good Slay the Spire player yet. I haven't even beaten Ascension 20 on the Defect, and part of the reason I'm making this video is because I need to get my Defect thought processes in check. I have climbed the Ascensions now up to Ascension 19, and now I feel lost. I have lost all confidence on the Defect. It has been beating me on stream relentlessly. I can't figure out how to build a Defect deck no matter the archetype. And so hopefully going over the cards kind of rebuilds my confidence, but also this is a video where, look, if you're a good Slay the Spire player, tell me where I'm going wrong. You know, tell me where I'm devaluing a card here or there. Tell me what I'm doing wrong about my thought process on a certain card. Tell me my mistakes, you know. I could think a card is terrible. In reality, that card is very good. Those are the kind of things I need to know. So hopefully this is a video that appeals to some people. I'm a noob. I don't think I'm very good at Slay the Spire. And so maybe this is a video I can look back on as well and go, you fucking idiot. That card was actually really good and you said it was shit, you know? Hopefully that's the kind of time capsule I'm going to set here. I'm going to try to be as brief as I can. I don't want this video to go for too long, but just as proof, haven't beaten A19 yet. Haven't beaten it yet. Still working on it. Okay, so I'm going to skip past Dual Cast and Zap for the moment because I think I'm pretty well... I think I understand their value relatively well, and they are part of the starting deck. I think my issue is with the card choices. So those are the cards I'm going to talk about, and I will have a timestamp for every single card in the description. Okay, Ball Lightning, I take it almost every time. As a first card choice, this is like the one that I'm incredibly confident in. I am happy to have this throughout the entire run. Probably won't take it as often in Act 2 or Act 3. But in Act 1, I'm almost always adding a Ball Lightning to the deck. There are a few fringe cases where it doesn't fit with what I'm doing. Like I've got a really good Claw deck going, or you know, a deck that favors zero-cost attacks, things like that. In that case, I might not add a Ball Lightning, but in almost every other case, for any other archetype I'm going for, a Ball Lightning is added. In terms of an upgrade, I'll do it if I've got a spare one, but I oftentimes feel like there are other upgrades that are more valuable than a Ball Lightning upgrade. But yeah, Ball Lightning, obviously rate it quite highly. It's almost a snap pick, you know, if it's first card offered. So Barrage is a card that I am confident adding into my deck if I have probably, you know, more than 2 orb generation sources that I'm also not using. So a Zap plus a Ball Lightning, I'm still not super confident in Barrage because I know I'm going to dual cast those orbs, which means when Barrage does come around, I'm going to have, you know, maybe 1, maybe 2 orbs, and it's just not enough to kind of value a Barrage in the deck. If I have something like a Capacitor and can add more orbs, obviously Barrage is more enticing, but it is one of those attacks that I add, you know, probably not as much as I should add. I probably underrate Barrage quite a bit. The upgrade as well, I think, is obviously quite valuable. But I have to have decent amount of orb generation for me to even think about adding Barrage because, again, I'm trying to evoke these orbs as well, even if they're Frost, even if they're Darkness. I'm trying to evoke them. And so having a Barrage that is, you know, can be mistimed, essentially, when I have 0 orbs, is not something that I'm super excited about. But, again, if I have enough orb generation, and I'm using them as kind of passive block, passive damage, then I will think about adding a Barrage. Beam Cell is a card I really, really like, and I really like the upgrade as well, obviously. The extra turn of Vulnerable means that, I mean, shit, it explains itself, right? It means you're going to have an extra turn of Vulnerable, and that is sometimes incredibly, incredibly valuable. The damage is not exactly what you're grabbing Beam Cell for, but it helps. It's nice. I think my problem with Beam Cell is I think about it too archetypally. Like, I don't even know if that's a fucking word, but I think about it as, okay, am I grabbing zero-cost attacks? If so, add a Beam Cell to the deck. I have been more confident with it recently, adding it because obviously it helps. Even if you have just strikes in your deck, the extra damage from that vulnerable is very useful. But I think the biggest mistake I make with Beam Cell is thinking about it in terms of archetypes. Is this a deck with Claws? Is this a deck with Streamline? Is this a deck with Sunder? If so, add a Beam Cell, right? Where in reality, I feel like I should add this more often because, again, even if my deck is filled with Strikes and Ball Lightnings and Cold Snaps, the Beam Cell is still very valuable. And yeah, in terms of adding it, I mean, I feel like I'll add this no matter what act we're on. But I'm definitely more keen on just adding one in Act 1. And I feel like I never go over one beam cell in my deck either. More than one beam cell feels like overkill. Charge Battery, I really like Charge Battery. Like, I seriously really enjoy Charge Battery. Probably more than I should. I mean, this is almost like a snap pick for me if I need better blocks. And the reason I like it so much is because of that energy. I don't necessarily take it for the block, although the upgrade makes it a decent block. I always take it for the energy. And I think, well, I mean, an extra energy on my next turn is crazy, right? Especially if I have draw to back it up. Charge Battery is probably a card I overvalue. Like, I really like Charge Battery, but I think in some of the recent decks that I've played with, Charge Battery is not as powerful as I think it should be. And that extra energy can sometimes go amiss, especially if I don't have the draw to back up the use of the extra energy. But I seriously like Charge Battery. It probably is a card that I overvalue, but if I'm looking for a block, especially on Act 1, especially on Act 2, I'll happily add a Charge Battery. And I value it almost purely for that extra energy, and maybe that's me overvaluing it. Okay, so my experience with Claw is purely archetypal. If I'm going for cheap attacks, zero-cost attacks, if I'm looking for an all-for-one, if I'm thinking about a Rebound or a Hologram, I'm adding a Claw, you know? And as soon as I start adding Claws, as soon as I start adding Beam Cells, Go for the Eyes, things like that, that's when the deck becomes purely attack archetype, right? I don't try to mix, and maybe that's my mistake. A Claw in a deck that is still, you know, maybe has a focus on lightning or you know, focus in general, I feel like a Claw could still do well. But my thoughts on Claw right now is that it is purely archetypal, like I said. I'll add it if I'm going for that build, you know? And that's where my brain gets kind of stuck. You know, maybe a Claw in just a thin deck would be valuable regardless, but I purely think about Claw as archetypal, and that upgrade isn't entirely enticing to me either. I do like adding Claws in floor 1, in Act 1, but every time I add a Claw in Act 1, it almost forces my hand to create, or it feels like it forces my hand to create a attack-based deck and ignore things like Ball Lightning, ignore things like Defrag, ignore things like Bias Cognition. It almost creates the archetype just by me choosing it, which it shouldn't, I don't think, but if I'm going to add it, I may as well try to synergize with it. So right now, my experience with Claw is purely archetypal, and I think that hinders me a little bit. Cold Snap. So if I'm looking at Ball Lightning or Cold Snap, I'm taking the Ball Lightning almost every single time. To me, channeling that Frost is nice if I can also then attack with a Barrage, or if I have a Defrag to back up the one Frost that's being generated. Other than that, Cold Snap is not an attack I take often, because to me, it's passive. And if I'm adding a Cold Snap, it's in Act 1, and in Act 1, I like to be aggressive. I like to be aggressive generally, but Cold Snap to me is a card that is inferior to others that are on offer. That is probably the wrong thinking, though. I probably very much underrate the channeling of one Frost, even though it's basically the same amount or same damage as a Strike if you don't upgrade it. It's that one Frost that I think I'm probably devaluing a little bit. You know, it's that one Frost that blocks 2 damage, maybe 3 if I have a Defrag or a Data Disc or something like that, that I'm just not valuing, right? Other than that, though, Cold Snap is not on the bottom of the list. It's probably somewhere underneath Ball Lightning in terms of attacks that I would add to my deck in Act 1. And I think the most attractive part about Cold Snap to me is the channeling of the Frost to then use with something like a Barrage or something like a Capacitor, something like you know, a Defrag, right? That's the most enticing thing to me. If I can't buff up that Frost, then a Cold Snap is less attractive. Speaking about attacks that I don't really take, Compile Driver is one of them. I don't value the draw on Compile Driver against the damage and utility of the other attack cards that I could be taking in Act 1 especially. So when I think about Compile Driver, I go, okay, well, I'd rather a Rebound. You know, I'd rather a Cold Snap, I'd rather a Ball Lightning, I would rather maybe even take a charge battery or something like that, right? So Compile Driver to me doesn't get a lot of use. I don't pick it up too often. The one draw, again, I think, okay, do I have Frost and Lightning? Maybe Compile Driver is worth it. Other than that, though, it's not something that I take too often. There are other cards that I value more, and there are other ways to get draw as well, like Coolheaded. That's the only one that's on my screen right now, but yeah, Compile Driver I don't value too much, but that draw is obviously quite powerful, and it's probably a card I should value more often. Speaking of Coolheaded, I like taking this one, which is weird for me because I like being aggressive when all this card does is channel 1 and draw 1. The upgrade is one that I almost always try to go for as well, because drawing 2 is obviously much better than drawing 1, makes the card more valuable, and the value of cards in this game is one thing that I'm certainly trying to learn about more. But it's not obviously the one Frost that's enticing for Coolheaded, it is that draw. It is not well, I guess inherently it might be a passive card, but I think its utility is very high, right? Channeling that Frost to get some block, drawing 2 cards. It's very nice. I obviously rate Coolheaded quite highly. Coolheaded is one of those cards, kind of like Compile Driver, I suppose, as well, where that draw could get you out of a sticky situation. You know, especially that's why the upgrade is super valuable, to me at least, on Coolheaded. Go for the Eyes is one that I take, and I almost see it as extra block. It's a 0-cost block, right? The 3 damage is not what entices me, and obviously an extra turn of weak on the upgrade is fantastic. So I see this as a way to remove artifacts. I see this as a way to get a little bit of extra block out of enemies that I can actually use Go for the Eyes on. The only drawback, obviously, is it's only if the enemy is attacking. Which creates a weird dynamic with Go for the Eyes, because it also works with the archetype I think I like the most on the Defect, which is that 0-cost attack. Give me all for 1. Give me all the cards that, like Streamline, Sunder, give me the ones, just give me the attacks, right? That's my favorite Defect archetype. Go for the Eyes fits in that quite nicely. But it probably is a bit more situational than I'd like, and it actually tends to be a card I don't take too often, unless I'm already kind of set up for a 0-cost or an attack deck on the Defect. And that's probably my biggest problem with taking a lot of the cards, like Beam Cell, like Claw, like Streamline, is if I'm not going for an archetype that's going to allow synergy with these kinds of cards, then they're less likely that I'm going to take them. But in reality, a Go for the Eyes in any deck, especially like a thin deck or a deck that has, you know, extra draw, could actually be quite useful. You know, it could save you a lot of HP, especially with that extra turn of weak. But it is definitely, out of all the 0-cost and cheap attacks that you can get on the Defect, it's the one I go for the least, which maybe says something about the way I play the game. Hologram is one that I take purely because other people say it's good, and it is... Okay, well, that's not entirely true. I take it because there are some very simple synergies with it. Hologram plus Streamline, Hologram plus 0-cost cards, Hologram plus Claw, Hologram plus Beam Cell, hell, even a Hologram plus an upgraded Rebound, or vice versa, sorry. There are things you could do with Hologram that allow you to, I don't know, get done what you need to get done, right? In many circumstances where I've been stuck in a rut, about to die, needing desperate block, I'm hologramming something like a leap. You know, I'm hologramming something like a reinforced body, which can be very powerful. And so I use hologram almost as a get out of jail free card. When I've oh shit, I've already used a card, well, I can get it back with hologram. And it is that card that takes up an upgrade at a campfire. You know, if there's hologram and a Streamline upgrade on the line, it's very difficult to choose between the two for me, you know, because they're both very great cards, but the hologram needs an upgrade almost, right? Especially on longer fights, the hologram is going to be very, very useful. It is one that I take even if I'm not going for a cheap attack deck. It's one that I take even if I don't have 4 energy and I can hologram back a Sunder after using it. It's one that I take no matter what. People say it's good. I've taken it. I understand now that it is good. The synergies don't really go beyond kind of, you know, 2 cards. Like, it is a hologram plus this card. It's not a hologram plus this, plus that, plus this, plus that. It's a hologram plus this card. And that's the synergies that I go for. Leap is a card that I really like. I really enjoy Leap. And oftentimes I go for the upgrade on Leap as well. It is just a really solid block card. Like, there's no other way to describe it for me. I just like taking it. I like using it. It's very powerful in many circumstances. I find it very useful on Act 2 as well. Just a 1-cost 12 block. It's very nice. if I have other sources of decent block, like decent frosts with some upgraded focus or a reinforced body, hell, even an auto shield, something like that, I'm less likely to take leap because I don't want to dilute my deck with blocks if I'm already good. But I guess that's the same with every block card. But I like leap. I like leap a lot. I take it quite often. I think it's just a solid block card. Rebound is a card similar to Hologram, where there's only a couple synergies that I know of where I'm using Rebound in really creative ways. Like you can use an all, or you can rebound an all for one, then draw, then use the all for one again, and you kind of get 2, maybe 3 uses out of your 0 cost cards in one turn, just by using Rebound and being able to draw, which is very powerful. But other than that, I'm doing the simple stuff. I'm rebounding Streamline, I'm rebounding Claw, I'm rebounding Beam Cell, I'm rebounding blocks that I need for next turn, and so it's very useful for that. And 9 damage as well. I feel like that's pretty good. You know, and this is a card I'll take purely for damage, even if it's my first card choice, you know, even if there's 0 synergy with it, and the other cards that aren't strikes or defends, I'll still take it. And Rebound finds itself in a lot of my decks, even if it's not got like a crazy synergy, like, again, Streamline or Claw or whatever. Rebound still finds its way in a lot of my decks because it is useful with things like Bull Lightning. It is useful with things like auto shields or, you know, Bullseye, right? It is useful for those kinds of things. And so it finds its way in a lot of my decks. Recursion is the one card, or one of the cards, where if you're a good player watching this video, you might value it more. I barely ever take Recursion. Barely. Maybe that's because I can never really find ways to get Darkness going consistently. But Recursion, to me, is a card that if I'm adding, I want to upgrade it. But I just value Recursion less. Like, to me, it's almost a card that fills up my deck for no reason. I can evoke my orbs already with dual cast. I can just put other orbs on that will evoke the orbs in front. And so Recursion is obviously very useful when it comes to Darkness, but Darkness isn't something that I get going very often. So maybe that's my problem with Recursion. But when I look at Recursion in a card choice, it's like almost always the least valuable one there. It's almost always the one that synergizes the least with my deck. It's almost always the one that if I add it, I'm barely going to use it. It just fills up my deck. Yeah, it doesn't feel very good. The upgrade, now you're talking Recursion is more enticing. Now Recursion actually sounds pretty good. But oftentimes you have to add it, then you have to upgrade it. That costs an upgrade for something like that's obviously going to be more valuable. And so Recursion is a card I don't take very often. I would love to learn more about it, but for the moment, it is not one that I take very often. There's a similar story with Stack. Game block equal to the number of cards in your discard pile. I don't like relying on super conditional things like that. Well, not super conditional, but I don't like relying on things like that. When I have ended up with a stack in my deck, either by choice or through powers or random card generation of any sort, stack has been unreliable, to say the least. And for that reason, I barely take it. There are other blocks that you can take over stack that are far, far, far more reliable. And the problem with stack, I suppose, is that if you draw it when your discard pile is kind of empty, it's kind of useless, right? I think stack would work obviously quite well in a large deck. Like if you've got a mummified hand and you're just adding powers on powers on powers, then I think stack could work well. If you've got a large deck, I don't know though. Stack is too conditional for me to really value it over other blocks. And I think that's the thing with stack, is that I don't value it over other block cards that I could take, right? So in that sense, it is similar to Recursion in that it fills up my deck, it's conditional, it's unreliable, and I don't take it. Steam Barrier is kind of the same thing. I really hate the degradation of Steam Barrier. I really hate that it loses its block, and so I barely ever take it. And this is a card that every time I see it, I'm like, oh, fuck, I should probably take Steam Barrier. It's probably pretty good here, but I don't. I don't take it, and it's because I get scared of those longer fights where Steam Barrier becomes a 0 cost, 0 block, and it just becomes useless, and it becomes a dead draw. I really don't like it for that reason, and if I draw it on a turn where I'm needing attacks instead, like, it's too, I don't know. I definitely should value it more, most likely, but I don't for the moment. Even in a deck where I have all for one, Steam Barrier isn't enticing because, if my hand is full or... I still would rather draw back a Beam Cell or a Go for the Eyes or a Claw than a Steam Barrier. I don't know. You know, Steam Barrier is just not one that I take super often. Again, it's a block that I don't value as highly as other blocks. Streamline is great. I love Streamline. I love Streamline a lot. It finds its way into decks that aren't even based on attacks. You know, I'll use this in a deck where I'm just kind of going for focus, or it doesn't necessarily have any crazy synergies. If, you know, I have a deck with Streamline or Rebound or just Streamline and Hologram, that's good enough for me. That's how much I value Streamline. It does great damage, especially upgraded for what is eventually going to be 1 to 0 cost, right? After you use it initially. So I like Streamline a lot. I think it's incredibly powerful, especially on longer fights. The one problem I have with Streamline is that when I take it on floor 1, which I do a lot, almost every time, the one problem I have with that is that the 2 energy actually becomes kind of expensive. Like there are many turns where using a Streamline is good, but there are also many turns where I would rather just double or triple block. And so I can't use Streamline, and then so Streamline still costs 2 by the time I draw it next, and then it's just this whole problem that I can't deal with because I can have to continue blocking, and Streamline's not cheap yet, so I can't use it, and there's other 1-cost attacks that I could use. That's the one problem I have with Streamline now, but I still think I'd take it because, I mean, shit, in the future it's going to be super valuable. Longer fights, I'm going to thin my deck across the run, hopefully, and Streamline becomes incredibly valuable. And it's the start of, again, my favorite archetype, which is 0-cost attacks. Sweeping Beam is, in terms of AoEs, I think it's pretty valuable. It's basically strike damage, but do it to all enemies and you draw a card. And then the upgrade is one that I value pretty highly on Sweeping Beam as well, purely because of the AoE. If I have this and I go up against Sentries in Act 1, I'm very happy. If I have this and I go up against Donu Decker in Act 3, I'm very happy. You know, that draw's good, the damage is not terrible, especially if they're vulnerable, things like that. It can go very nice, especially in Act 1 as well, if you find yourself up against the 5 slimes, or a couple of the duo enemies, especially in Act 3, or Act 2 as well, sorry, when, you know, 2 out of 3 of the elite fights are multiple enemies. Sweeping Beam is very valuable. And if I'm going to say anything, it's probably that I overvalue Sweeping Beam, but I like that it's AoE. I like that you draw. Those are 2 things that you need in a Slay the Spire run, and so there's no reason for me to ever really not take Sweeping Beam unless I already have sources of AoE like Electrodynamics or something like that, right? So Sweeping Beam is one that I take a lot, maybe more than I should, but I really like Sweeping Beam. Now we get to some of the energy cards. I don't take Turbo as much as I should. I hate the idea of a Void in my deck, especially because I tend to try and make Defect decks really thin, which means I'm most likely going to draw that Void. But obviously there is insane value with things like Echo Form, with expensive attacks like Sunder. If you need to play a power, if you draw Turbo and that power on the same turn, that's very useful, obviously. And the extra energy can save you. It can allow you to play another block. It can be Turbo plus Reinforced Body if you are taking 35 damage on a single turn. So there is utility in Turbo, but I avoid it purely because of the Void, which I don't like that I avoid it because of that, because I should be able to manage the lack of energy. The 2 or 3 energy that I gain on one turn should be able to outweigh the loss of energy on another turn. At least that's what I feel, especially if it's to get out Echo Form or something like that. So I don't take Void as much as or Turbo as much as I should. I should definitely take it more, because I think just being able to, especially on Defect, get your powers out on a turn where you draw Turbo and the same powers is super, super, super valuable. It just becomes scary on longer fights as well, especially if you use it multiple times. It's like, that can get really, really, really scary. But if you manage it, I think Turbo is one of those cards where, yeah, like I said, if you can manage it well, if you can be disciplined with its use, then you probably get some pretty decent value out of it. Aggregate for me is one where if I'm going for a thin deck, I'm going to avoid it, because I think it often becomes a dead draw at that point, because obviously you're expending 1 energy to use it, and your draw pile at that point, when you draw it, it could be not enough, not big enough for you to gain any use out of the extra energy. It's also a card that I would like to upgrade if I do pick it up, because the 3 or the every 3 cards is obviously much better than the every 4. This is another one of those cards that's kind of conditional for me, like Recursion, like Stack, but it is less conditional, and I'm much more happy to take it. It is one that I'll happily add if my deck is inflated a bit in Act 2, towards the end of Act 1, especially Act 3 as well, if I could use some extra energy. It is that card that I see and I'm like, oh, well, shit, actually, there are some turns where I could use some extra energy. This stays with me for the whole fight. This could be very useful. I'll pick it up, you know, and I'll look to upgrade it. I like Aggregate for that, but I think I get too scared of thin decks and Aggregate being a dead draw because my deck is too thin, my draw pile is not big enough, things like that. But maybe I'm misunderstanding Aggregate in that sense. Auto shields I like a lot. I really like auto shields. I don't even consider the upgrade for it. I take it purely because it's insane. It acts as almost a get out of jail free card. 1 cost, gain 11 block if I have no block, which works really well if you have Frost Orbs whipping around as well. It works really well if you play it in the right order. If you don't have block on a single turn, then an auto shield is great. If you have something like a Captain's Wheel or an Anchor or I forget the names of the other relics, but then auto shields obviously isn't going to be as good. But no, I value auto shields a lot. I really, really, really like it. 1 cost, 11 block. I mean, you cannot go wrong, especially if you know you're not going to have block at the start of turns, and you can bolster the block with those Frost Orbs. Blizzard. I would like to play Blizzard more. I'd like to use it more, but Blizzard requires other cards to be able to use. A Glacier is almost a must. A Cold Snap is almost a must. And being able to use those cards often is almost a must. Replacing the Lightning with Cracked Core as well is obviously going to be very useful with Blizzard. But the damage is too low a lot of the time to even justify it. Like, I have good block. I like my use of Frost Orbs, but Blizzard isn't really going to be the thing that wins me the run. You know, it's not going to be the card that changes a lot, right? Which is sad because I'd like Blizzard to be very good. Maybe if they had changed it to, you know, 3 damage to upgraded 4, then, you know, we can start talking. I know the numerical values in Slay the Spire are really, really, really particular in that sense because, you know, they actually do matter. But Blizzard a lot of the time is just... It's not conditional, or not too conditional. Oftentimes you are adding Frost Orbs to your rotation, but there are just better sources of damage. There are just better sources of damage you can use that aren't Blizzard, essentially. But I would like to use it more. I would like to have more runs where I have a bunch of Frost and can actually use Blizzard. So I suppose the innate part of boot sequence is a negative as well, because you're drawing boot sequence over drawing other cards that could be pretty valuable to you, like your powers that allow you to win that fight. But boot sequence, it's just kind of fantastic because, at least in my opinion, because if you're copping damage on turn 1 that you'd like to avoid, boot sequence is there. You know, upgraded version to 13, totally fine, but I generally don't. And the good thing about it is that it's one-time use too. You use it and it exhausts. If you're not getting attacked on turn 1, you don't even need to use it. And at that point, it's a 0 cost 10 block. It's not an insta-pick for me, just again because of that innate, because maybe I have better sources of block and I don't want it to clog up my deck. But costing 0 is fantastic too. Like, this is a really good card. I value it highly. There are fringe cases where I don't take it, but a lot of the time it's like, okay, this is going to save me a lot of HP on those deadly turn 1s, especially Act 2 when you want to face elites, and a lot of those elites attack you turn 1. It's like, well, I need some sort of counter to that is reliable, and that's why boot sequence is so desirable, is because it is consistent. You get it turn 1, you know you're going to be able to block at least 10 block on that first turn. So Bullseye is one of the cards on the Defect that is a yes or no for me. And what I mean by yes or no is, for Bullseye, it's, am I going for orbs dealing damage? Am I are lightning and darkness doing most of my damage? If yes, take Bullseye. If no, ignore Bullseye. It's not a card I take if I'm going for, again, an attack deck, right? That lock-on does nothing for me, and the damage is too inconsequential for it to be in my deck. It's a yes or no. One of the many cards on Defect that are a yes or no for me. I think about it purely archetypal. And maybe that's a mistake, but unless I know that most of my damage is lightning or darkness, if that's the case, I'm taking it. If it's not the case, I'm not taking it. And maybe that's really not how I should be thinking about it, but it is that black and white for me when it comes to Bullseye. And it is a card I look to upgrade as well. An extra 3 damage and an extra turn of lock-on is valuable, at least in my book, especially on longer fights. And if you can get rid of the artifacts on some of the bosses and enemies, then Bullseye becomes very useful. Capacitor is an interesting one to me because Capacitor is a card where the scariest thing about Capacitor is that with 2 more orb slots, it means you're evoking less orbs. That's the downside of Capacitor. And the upgraded version and any other source of more orbs in the game is that it means you're evoking less orbs. Like if you have 3 orb slots, you can whip them around so quickly. You're constantly evoking lightning. You're constantly dealing damage. You're always refreshing your orbs. You can manage your darkness orbs pretty well. You're constantly evoking the frost as well, which is giving you extra block. If you add Capacitor, that means you can't do that as often. And so if I'm going to add Capacitor, I want to know that I have the focus to back it up. So a Capacitor is one that I'll add if I know I have extra focus. If I have a data disk or a defrag, any other way of getting focus, I'm happy to add Capacitor. But out of all of the rares in this game, it is the one I add. It is one of them that I add the least. And it is because of that fact that I can't evoke these orbs. Like I almost need to rely on being able to evoke the frost. If I can't evoke the frost that's going to save me by evoking it to get that block, then, you know, that's not valuable to me. You know, the passive block is nice, don't get me wrong, but it needs to be decent passive block for me to even think about adding Capacitor. And the same goes for damage. Capacitor is just too... It doesn't allow me to do something that I value a lot, which is, again, evoking those orbs. Even though you can stack up orbs, you have dual cast, you have fission, whatever, right? Maybe it often comes to me at some of the worst times where I don't have good synergies, but I value the evoking so much that Capacitor is often, yeah, kind of put on the bench. Chaos is one that I will happily take, especially if I'm going for, you know, an orb-focused deck. At that point, I'm not really super fussed about what orb I get, and it fills out my orb slots. Funnily enough, I just talk shit about Capacitor, but Chaos kind of goes well with it, right? Channeling 2 random orbs, no matter what those orbs are, I like. It's just, it to me is kind of one that requires an upgrade, because again, there are ways to channel orbs that I want to channel rather than random orbs. And so for that reason, Chaos might not be taken as much, but I still do like taking Chaos. Again, especially if I'm going for an orb-focused deck, where I can see Chaos being valuable, not only to give me random orbs that'll deal damage, give me energy, block, whatever, but also to push other orbs forward. So for that reason, I think Chaos is pretty decent. The same can be said for Chill. I really like Chill, even if it's not innate, even if I never upgrade it. There are so many enemies, especially in Act 2, where Chill is just one of the best things you can draw. It is so fantastic, especially if you have the focus to back it up. I think Chill is really, really valuable for 0 cost as well. You can't really go wrong. I feel like there's a reason there's some birds in that art, right? Is because if you draw Chill and you go up against those 3 birds on Act 2 or in Act 2, you're happy. You know, you're a happy man, and that's one of the reasons you could consider making it innate as well, especially if you can time the upgrade going into Act 2, then Chill is going to be very, very valuable for you. It is almost like boot sequence, but the block stays. You know, it turns itself into passive block after you play Chill, so I'll happily take it, especially if I know I've got the focus to back it up, and it's not going to be a dead draw that I'm not, you know, not happy to get, which oftentimes it's not. Yeah, Chill's fantastic. Okay, so there are a few cards on the Defect that I just don't take, and Consume is one of them. I am not afraid to tell you that I just don't take Consume. And probably the reason I'd never take Consume is because I rarely take Capacitor, I suppose. And I often rarely end up with orbs that are, or multiple orb slots. And even if I did, I'd still, I don't know. Consume is just not one that I take, which is probably a really terrible thing, because Consume on paper could actually be very, very good. It's just one of those cards that you play throughout the fight, and it becomes more useful as the fight goes on. It's one of those long-term cards, right? It obviously has an instant appeal and an instant drawback, but I have to be thinking much more long-term when it comes to Consume, and oftentimes I'm just not, which is weird. I don't know. You know, maybe Consume is just one of those cards I'm not super comfortable with, super knowledgeable about, but there are a few cards on the Defect that I just don't take. Unfortunately, Consume is one of them. Darkness to me, I mean, I think it makes sense. If you're going for a deck that's going to value darkness, if you're going for a deck that's going to like triggering the ability of all your dark orbs, then obviously, I mean, darkness is a no-brainer, and I'll take it if I need an extra source of orb damage, you know, especially if I can back it up with some focus, then I'll happily take darkness. And there are a lot of turns, especially on Defect, where you've got enough block, you've got your boot sequence, you've got your Glacier out there. Just play darkness, you know, get a darkness orb out there, channel the ability of all your other orbs, and you're set. So for that reason, if you're going into it, Maybe I think about Darkness 2 archetypally as well, but it does what you want it to do, essentially. Okay, so Defrag, I mean, it is the scaling of your Defect run in Slay the Spire. Even if it's just game 1 focus, it doesn't matter. It's valuable. The upgrade as well is almost a must-have, in my opinion, at least. If it does, you know, even if I'm on a run where I am going for an all-for-one thing, I am going for 0-cost attacks, I'll still happily take a defrag, because I'm not always removing focus, but having the extra focus is fantastic. It's a power, it works well generally on the Defect. There's not really a reason to not take defrag. Like, you see it, and you're like, yep, that's my scaling. You know, that's going to boost my Frost Orbs from 2 to 4, potentially. That's a lot of extra block. That's valuable. That's a lot of extra damage. That's valuable. Defrag is your scaling, right? And scaling is one of the things you need to win a run in Slay the Spire. At least that's what I've been led to believe. And so for that reason, defrag is fantastic. Okay. Doom and Gloom. I hate that it costs 2 energy. And that makes it a very 50-50 card for me. I like the AoE. I like that it channels the dark. I hate that it costs 2 energy. The only thing that will ever stop me from taking Doom and Gloom is the 2 energy. And there are sometimes as well, it's weird because it's kind of 2 ends of the spectrum to me. I either hate the fact that it costs 2 energy and I'll not take it, or I'm totally okay with having to use the 2 energy and I will play it. Like, it's weird like that. I like the AoE. I like the upgrade. Going to 14 is kind of nice. And obviously the fact that it channels the dark is a bit of an extra bonus. It's not an instant bonus, but it is quite nice. I think I overvalue Doom and Gloom because of its AoE ability. If I don't have an Electrodynamics or something like that, then Doom and Gloom is obviously quite useful. It's just really fucking expensive a lot of the time. Yeah, it's a card that I love to hate and that I hate to love. It's that kind of relationship with Doom and Gloom, and that fucking cost 2 is this pure source of that hatred and that love. I don't know. Double Energy is a card that I will take more often than something like Turbo. There's no downside other than the fact that it exhausts, and if you played the card in the correct order, which you should be doing, then you can benefit even if it costs 1, but then the upgrade obviously makes it cost 0, and that's fantastic. If you get a Toxic Egg, a 0-cost double energy is fantastic. That allows you to start taking more expensive cards, like powers that you would otherwise not take, like Creative AI or Sunder or Echo Form. Sorry, Sunder's not a power, but you know what I mean. Expensive cards, right? And so double energy is that other source of energy that I'll take over a turbo because there is no downside other than it exhausts. But at the point you're using double energy, you're most of the time you're okay that it's exhausting. You're not upset that it's exhausting. So yeah, I take double energy if I'm going for a deck that's got a lot of expensive cards and I can see the synergy, you know, popping off on a certain turn. There are some times where I think it's a dead draw and I would never ever want it, but obviously as well it works fantastically if you've got extra draw. That's the other thing that these energy cards like Aggregate, like Turbo, like Double Energy work well with, is if you have extra draw, then they can be really, really fantastic because it allows you to play a bunch of cards. And the Defect has a lot of expensive cards that you want to play. And so double energy helps for that reason. Sometimes I won't take it, but I feel like a lot of the time, especially if I'm getting towards the end of Act 2, Act 3, I've added a bunch of cards that I value playing, double energy becomes very enticing. Equilibrium is another block card that I value super highly as well. Even without the upgrade, the ability to retain my current hand is... I mean, it just allows your brain to start thinking about what you're going to do next turn. You know, it's two energy for a 13 block is fine. Don't get me wrong. But then being able to retain the attacks in your hand that you can use next turn, being able to retain an all-for-one without losing it into your draw pile, because you can't play it now because you need to block. So you play Equilibrium, then you have an all-for-one next turn, or then you have a Sunder or this or that. It's just that retain ability is very nice on the Defect in a lot of circumstances. And I feel like if you have the choice of taking Equilibrium and you look at your deck and you go, okay, well, what cards would I like to retain? There's a lot of them. You know, if you can't play a defrag on this turn because you need to desperately block, Equilibrium makes sure that you can play it on your next turn so that you still have the scaling to win that fight. So I like Equilibrium a lot. I take it a decent amount of the time, and it's a block card I'll happily add. FTL is... I don't want to say it's a snap pick because it's not that powerful and I don't value it like that, right? But it is a card I like a lot, no matter what, you know, deck archetype I'm going for. The ability to deal 5 damage, upgrade it to 6. But if you play it in the right order, you play it as your first or second card that turn, you draw a card. That's valuable. 0 cost, draw a card. You just get a free 5 to 6 damage, and you draw a card that could save you on that turn. I think it's incredible. And obviously it works really well with cards like All for One. Again, my favorite archetype. Yeah, I like taking FTL in kind of any circumstance, especially if I'm struggling with draw, especially if I'm struggling with, yeah, just getting the cards out there consistently that I need to. Force Field is one that, because of its cost and because of its synergies with powers, I will only really take if I have multiple powers. If I have like 3 powers and I see a Force Field, it's like, okay, I'll take it, you know? Because powers are the things you want to get out there that allow you to win the fights that you're taking, and Force Field becomes this 1 cost 12 block, similar to an upgraded leap, or, you know, auto shields, or a boot sequence, things like that, right? Force Field is very good for that reason, and it synergizes well with creative AI as well. Mummified Hand especially. It's not necessarily a yes or no for me. There are some conditional things that have to happen for me to want to take Force Field, but if those are met, happily I'll take Force Field as a consistent 12 block. So I said that there are cards that I will barely ever take on Defect. Fusion's another one of those cards. 2 energy to channel 1 plasma. I don't see myself on many turns wanting to channel 1 more energy that costs 2 energy, you know? Especially because I like to whip orbs around and I like to evoke a lot of orbs. That plasma is going to disappear quite quickly. It is a card that I probably don't value super highly. So it's a card that I should value more highly, but I just don't. The cost is unappealing. The plasma is not that appealing to me. It's just not a card that I would ever really take, unless, of course, there's some synergy or the circumstance calls for it. It's just one of those cards that I look at and I go, yeah, there are other rares in the pool. There are other cards in the 3 that I have on option here that I would rather take over Fusion. Genetic Algorithm is another yes or no, but instead of archetypes, is it early in the run? Yes. Take Genetic Algorithm. Is it late in the run? Yes. Don't take Genetic Algorithm. It's very simple. The upgrade's nice too. The incrementing is quite good. But if it's not early in the run, Genetic Algorithm doesn't really get much use from me. I think the latest I'll take it is like late Act 1, early Act 2. But that's it. I'm not stretching it any further than that. It just becomes a hassle to increment it, you know, over time for 1 energy. So it's a very simple yes or no card for me, Genetic Algorithm. Glacier is fantastic. I mean, look, I'm not the best at Slay the Spire. That's one of the reasons I'm making this video, but there are many times where I don't think you'll find many people who think that Glacier is bad. And maybe that's where I'm wrong, but 7 block, 2 energy, gain 2 frost. I mean, dude, it gets you out of a lot of trouble, especially, again, if you have the focus to back it up, if you've got a defrag in the back pocket, if you've got a data disk, a focus potion, man. Glacier is fantastic for that reason. You get some block, you get the frost, and the upgrade makes it even more enticing to play too. Even if I'm purely going for a attack-based deck, even if I want as much lightning as I can get, I'm still taking a Glacier. You know, the ability to channel orbs in front of the 2 frosts that it generates, and the block that you get from it is too powerful for me to pass up. So a lot of the time I'm taking Glacier. Heatsinks is one that I will take if I have powers already, but is not one that I'll take any other time. If I end up with Heatsinks because of creative AI or another source of card generation, fantastic, gets me a bit of extra draw, but unless I have powers that synergize with Heatsinks, I'm not taking it. I'm just not. The upgrade for Heatsinks makes it much more enticing, similar to the upgrade on Coolheaded, but without powers to synergize with Heatsinks, there's no reason for me to fill the deck with it, you know? And even then, it's like on the lower tier of powers that I will prioritize. Draw is powerful, don't get me wrong, but when the draw is conditional in this sense, it's less enticing. Hello World, I fucking hate. I hate Hello World, and maybe it's because creative AI always gives me Hello World and I never want to see Hello World, but I fucking hate Hello World. I want my deck and my run to generally be made up of cards that are of my choosing, right? And that are in my deck for a reason, that serve a purpose. If Hello World comes out here and gives me a fucking, like, a stack, or a recursion, or a cold snap when I don't want it, that just fills my deck with useless attacks, or any other common card, it's like, what was the point? It fills my hand as well. Like, over long fights, I feel like Hello World is scary because of how much it fills your deck, and it's just not a power that I'm happy to play for even 1 energy. I really don't like Hello World. I really don't like taking it. I hate when I get it from creative AI. It is definitely one of my least favorite cards on the Defect. Loop is a very easy power to take on on the contrast. I like taking Loop. I've taken Loop as my first or second card choice as well when other options are terrible, because I know I have Lightning that's going to trigger. And the upgrade's nice too. I think obviously I'm going to take Loop more if it synergizes with other powers in my deck, or I know that I've got Frost or Lightning to use it with, or Plasma at the front. You know, name an orb. But I like Loop. You know, I think Loop is just like a, yeah, I'll take a Loop. You know, especially again if I've got powers that synergize with it, or I like the passive damage or block that it provides. I'm like, yeah, Loop's great. I'll take a Loop. Happier to take it late though, rather than early, but still early I'm not afraid to take a Loop early. Melter is an interesting card. I feel like there are multiple times where I'm like, yeah, I don't really need a Melter, but then, you know, a few fights later and you're like, well, fuck, a Melter would have been really useful in this fight. Look, 1 energy for 14 damage and you remove all the block on the enemy is great. It's weird because a Melter feels like a card that is not as valuable to play on the Defect when there are so many cards that are more valuable to play that cost 1 energy or more energy, right? Melter sometimes gets put on the sidelines a bit, which is interesting because I think it's actually very useful. There's obviously that one fight in Act 2 where it shreds the little ball guy or whatever his name is, and there are multiple other fights where it does fantastically. Especially if my deck is thin enough, I'll happily take it. If my deck is based on attacks, I can have enemies that are vulnerable a lot of the time. Melter's a take for me. But it's weird because sometimes it feels like it does get pushed to the wayside and it doesn't get as much use as it probably does out of me. But still, I think it's a very good card. Overclock is another card very similar to me to Turbo. Turbo gives you the Void. Overclock gives you the Burn. I hate that it gives you the Burn. I love the draw, don't get me wrong, but I'm going to be using Overclock a lot. And that burn, or those multiple burns, are going to become very annoying. For that reason, I maybe avoid Overclock a bit more than I should. I just don't like the inconsistency that things like the Void or Bird give you. Unless I'm really struggling for draw, and I really need to take an Overclock, I just don't look at it with stars in my eyes. You know, that burn is so ugly to me. I just can't justify taking Overclock, because again, it's one of those things where over long fights, especially late boss fights, it's like, well, the burns are going to kill me. You know, the burns are going to be the death of me. Maybe it's because I'm undisciplined. Maybe I'd use Overclock when I shouldn't, but I just, you know, those burns aren't enticing. The 0 cost draw 2 upgraded to 3 though, I mean, you can't argue with that as being super valuable. I just think you have to be really disciplined to make Overclock work, and I am not that. So for that reason, I don't really take Overclock that much. Similarly with Recycle. Recycle is one of those cards where if I've got a creative AI, or if I've got a Sunder, multiple expensive cards, if I can create copies of cards, if I can get an upgrade on Recycle, then I'll take it. But it is that if, right? Okay, do I have recycled targets? Can I generate recycled targets? Yes, no. If so, take it. If not, leave it. You know, it's very simple like that. I do think it's very, very valuable. And of course, exhausting in any deck is super valuable too. But it is, again, conditional. Do I have the things that are going to make Recycle pop? Yes, take it. Reinforced Body. I don't know about you guys, but I take it basically every time. No matter what I'm going for, Reinforced Body finds its way into my deck. It is so useful, especially upgraded as well. It is just so satisfying. Every time I look at it in my hand, it is like a beacon of light. Like, I look at it and I go, yes, thank God I have Reinforced Body right now, because if I didn't, I'd be screwed. Being able to gain block equal to the number of energy you spend is insane. I love it. I'm happy with it. I think it's a card that should be in almost every one of your decks, especially if it's thin enough, especially if you're drawing it every single time you've got consistent block. Yeah, I think it's incredibly powerful. And it's obviously got synergies with other energy generating cards as well, you know, especially on fights where you need a ton of block. Then shit, pop a double energy, pop a turbo, man, and that Reinforced Body will do really well for you. It might save you if you haven't been able to, you know, put down that boss that scales later into the game. You're that 7 damage times 5 or whatever it is on one of these bosses. Reinforced Body can absolutely save you. So yeah, for that reason, I take it basically every time. Reprogram is another super conditional card where if I've basically exhausted or removed every single source of orb generation and orb power that I have, give me Reprogram. You know, it makes my attacks and my blocks stronger. And oftentimes that's an archetype that I'll go for, you know, so give me Reprogram. And I have to want to, oh, sorry, if I'm taking Reprogram, I have to give very little shit about my focus, right? Like I have to care so little about my orbs, then I'll take Reprogram. I understand it can be very risky and it can be iffy to take, which is why, again, I have to care so little about my orb generation and I have to have basically no reliance on the orbs that I have. Then I'm happy to take Reprogram. Then I'm like, yep, this is going to, you know, it's another form of scaling, and I'm happy to see it. Rip and Tear is one that I love early, and one that I'm happy to see late as well, especially if the enemies are vulnerable. Rip and Tear is like, I don't know, Rip and Tear, it feels a lot better to play when you have vulnerable enemies on the board, and if you have Echo Form out there as well. It feels really, really, really nice to play. Early, I think it's great. Late, I think it has its value. I mean, if you upgrade it, it's 18 damage for one cost, even 14 damage for one cost is fantastic. Combine that with a beam cell, combine that with an Echo Form, you got a recipe for a lot of damage. Yeah, if I'm going for an attack deck, Rip and Tear is probably going to be in there. Scrape, I actually like. I like Scrape a lot now. I think Scrape is very valuable for when you are going for an archetype that has zero cost cards, especially if you've got a Streamline in the deck, especially if you've got a Snecko Eye. That is a synergy I recently learnt about when it comes to Scrape. I'm like, oh shit, Scrape could actually draw me some insane zero cost blocks or powers or this or that. And so I'm much more keen on taking Scrape now a lot more often. I think it has become, I mean, maybe I have a fondness for it because I used to hate it and now I love it. I don't know. Simple as that. I'll take it especially I'll take it if it's going to draw zero cost cards, because Scrape then puts those zero cost cards, or it allows me to then play them. Now they're in the discard. Draw all for one. You know, Scrape's then found its use. Self-repair it's similar to Reinforced Body, where I'll take it a lot purely because it's useful. Like, the utility is fantastic. It's a power. Synergizes well with other things. Synergizes well with Echo Form. It'll heal you after combat. It's super powerful. I'm just going to take it, you know? If I see it, happy to add it. Even as a first card, even in late Act 2, less so in Act 3, but still happy to take it a lot of the time. Simple card. Like, it's a very simple, like, yeah, I'm happy to see it. Give me that, you know? In terms of draw on the Defect as well, I like Skim. You know, I'm not afraid of taking a Skim, even though it costs 1, no matter if you upgrade it or not. I think being able to draw 3 that's powerful enough for me to be like, okay, that could actually get me out of some trouble. You know, if I have 3 energy on a turn, I'm taking a lot of damage, I can play Skim, draw into a Glacier, now all of a sudden I'm taking a lot less damage, right? That's kind of the value I see in Skim. If I am struggling for draw, this is a much more enticing card than Overclock. Much more enticing than Overclock, and obviously it's going to help in a lot of situations, again, especially if you have like a zero cost attack deck. I feel like Skim's pretty valuable, you know? It is kind of that card that just seems like super solid. Take it a lot of the time. Maybe I'm overvaluing it, but it's nice to see, you know? And again, I see that draw as save me, you know? That drawing 3 cards for 1 energy cost, that's potentially going to save me. I love Static Discharge a lot. A lot of the time when I play any character in Slay the Spire, I'm not afraid to take a bit of damage. And I think that's one of my downfalls on the Defect, is that I take too much damage. But that's probably one of the reasons I like Static Discharge. I really like it. I like the upgrade on it as well. Going to 2, I think is fantastic. It works really nicely against the birds in Act 2. It works really nicely against Hexaghost. If I could get to the heart, it works really nicely against the heart, I think. It works really nicely against enemies that do multiple of 1 attack, which a lot of the late game enemies do. A lot of enemies just in the game do. So I think Static Discharge is really, really, really powerful. I take it a lot, especially if I've got other powers to synergize it with. It's just like, yeah, this is a really, like, it feels good to play. You know, it feels like a good card to play because you know you're going to get value out of it. Like, it's one of those powers you know you're going to get value out of. Or at least I do. And so I take it pretty often for that reason. Storm is one that I'll take if I've got powers to synergize it with. Like, it is that simple yes or no, similar to Heatsinks, similar to Force Field. Do I have powers to synergize it with? Yes. Okay, take it. And I'm happy to have one power to synergize it with, you know? Like, even with one, I'm like, yeah, happy to take it. It's conditional in that sense. The upgrade is less enticing to me if I don't have powers that will take advantage of the fact that this is the first one I'm going to play. But yeah, I'm very loose on Storm a lot of the time. It's like, do I have 1 or 2 powers? Yeah. Okay, I'll add a Storm. You know, I'm happy to add a Storm. Especially if I can then get creative AI later on in the run, things like that. I think Storm sets itself up nicely for late game runs, where just that extra bit of damage from the lightning that it generates is, yeah, it's very nice. Sunder is, I mean, I love Sunder. I really like Sunder a lot. It is so satisfying, especially, Sunder's almost like a guaranteed upgrade for me as well. I will absolutely spend a campfire to upgrade Sunder, because I think the value you get out of killing enemies with Sunder to gain that 3 energy is insane, especially floor 1, especially Act 1, sorry. Act 1 Sunder is one of the most beautiful things in the game to me. Even if you don't upgrade it, it's still fantastic. Snecko Eye synergy is obviously insane on Sunder. Necronomicon synergy is obviously insane on Sunder. Echo Form, insane on Sunder. There are so many things in the game that can make Sunder insane, and even if you don't have those, then I love taking Sunder. A Sunder plus a beam cell as well. 0 cost to make the energy vulnerable. Now Sunder does even more damage. Insane. I love Sunder. I take it a lot of the time, unless I've already got my damage sorted, but Sunder's utility is still insane to me. So I love the card. I take it a lot. Tempest is one of those cards where it's not super conditional to me. In fact, I probably take it a bit more often than I should, but if I have a reason to generate lightning, then I'll take it. I'll also add it to the deck and then use it just to generate like 1 lightning and then just have it exhaust, which might sound weird, but like, I don't know, Tempest is just it's kind of a weird card. Like it's not a nothing card, but the biggest use I see in Tempest is being able to increment Thunderstrike. The only other use Tempest has, I suppose, is moving your orbs around and being able to evoke them more quickly. But I see Tempest as very one note. I don't know if that's the correct way to see Tempest, but that's how I see it. Like, I look at it and I go, okay, that's not super exciting, but it's got its use. Maybe a couple of use cases. That's it. And because I actually like the fact that it exhausts, because a lot of the time I only want to use Tempest once. I don't want to use it more than once. So if I'm going for, you know, a lightning-based deck, if I need to move my orbs around, if I've got a Thunderstrike, sorry, then yeah, I'll take Tempest. I really like White Noise. I'm a big fan of White Noise, even at 1 cost. The idea that I can get a fight-saving power out of White Noise is, you know, it is incredible to think about it that way. Especially for 0 cost as well, if you can get the upgrade off, which I do a lot when I take White Noise. It's one of those cards I look at and go, yeah, that's a very enticing upgrade. I just love that idea. You know, it is RNG, it is random, it's not reliable, which goes against a lot of what I was saying about almost every other previous card. But it's just that RNG excites me about White Noise. It's got the potential to save you. It exhausts as well. So even if it doesn't, well, it's like, okay, well, it's gone now. It's not going to be a dead draw anymore or anything like that. And if you find yourself with extra energy on the Defect, White Noise is fantastic to play. And a lot of the powers on Defect are useful as well. You know, if you get a buffer out of a White Noise, if you get an Echo Form out of a White Noise, well, guess what, man? It costs 0. That's insane. And so White Noise is super enticing for that reason. And it is often a card that I just take and add to most of my decks. Okay. I looked at the time. We're over an hour, I think. Maybe I can edit it down to less, but let's speed through. No, not speed through, but let's try to be quick when it comes to the legendaries. All for One is purely archetypal for me. If I have 0 cost cards, if I'm going for a claw build, if I'm going for Beam Cell and go for the eyes and Streamline and all of those cards to be useful, I'm taking All for One. The synergy that All for One, or the plays that are created from All for One, are incredibly attractive to me. And even with that, you can still make Zap cost 0. You can still make Dual Cast cost 0. And then All for One has even more synergy without the attacks, right? But for most of the time, All for One, I'm using it because of its synergy with the 0 cost and cheap attacks. I love it for that reason. It is absolutely my favorite archetype to go for on the Defect. Obviously, I'm not going to get it early on, but I will start building a deck to get it. Like, I love it that much. I think it's fantastic. There are some insane things that you can do with it. Being able to play 20 plus cards on a single turn is just, you can't beat that, right? So I love All for One. Amplify, I don't take it that much because, again, it is slightly conditional. If you have a power that costs, or that is relatively cheap, if you have a power like Electrodynamics, a power like Biased Cognition, Buffer, even Machine Learning, then Amplify is nice, right? And if you can upgrade it, then you can make those powers even, or you can get even more value out of those powers. But you often see Amplify when it's stacked up against cards like Buffer. When it's stacked up against cards like Biased Cog, Echoform, Creative AI, that's when you see Amplify. And you're never taking Amplify if you don't have any of the other cards to begin with, unfortunately. Even the rare powers like Static Discharge, like Storm, Loop, I don't see those as super valuable unless it's, of course, self-repair. Like with most of the other powers on the Defect, Amplify has to have a reason for existing in my eyes. You know, like it has to have a reason that I'm going to take it, and a lot of the time you're choosing Amplify all the reasons that you need, you know, which is, in this case, a lot of the other rares. Biased Cognition obviously has an insane synergy with Core Surge. It also works well with Panacea. It works well with whatever that relic is that gives you the artifact. And it is almost... It's... Okay, the way I see Biased Cognition is I use it to either finish the fights quicker, and I don't care about losing focus every turn, or I have the synergy already with Panacea artifacts, or with any artifact generation, so I'm going to take it. Those are the two times where I'm very happy to take Biased. The first one, you have to be very disciplined when using it, I suppose, because if you use it too early, you're going to lose all your focus and then you lose the fight. But if you use it at the right time, then you get a nice power spike for a shorter period of time, but it will end the fight quicker. That's one use I find with Biased Cog. The second use is obviously if I've got Core Surge or any other artifact generation, and Biased Cog just becomes 4 to 5 focus for absolutely free. If I'm going for a deck that could use Biased Cog, I mean, shit, a lot of the decks do, it's a take. Buffer, I used to not take very often because when I was starting playing Slay the Spire, I didn't value the intangibility or the buffer in any form that much, especially at the cost of energy. But of course, that's a completely incorrect. Buffer is absolutely insane. It is almost a must-take if you need, or if you can afford it, especially if it fits in your deck. If you're happy to draw it, then I think Buffer is insane. If you can combine it with Echoform, if you can be disciplined enough to wait to play Buffer, then you're going to love life. Again, with Amplify as well, Buffer is one of those legendaries where it's going to save you, especially if you can upgrade it and get the 2 turns of intangibility. It's, yeah. And with all the frost generation, with all the block generation that you can do on the Defect, you can save those buffers. You can stack them up, right? So that becomes even more insane and even more of a reason to take Buffer. So yeah, definitely one of the best cards that you can ever choose to take, I think. Core Surge fits nicely in, obviously, decks that okay, look, I'll say it like this. The damage Core Surge does is nice. And for that reason, sometimes you just take it because it gives you an artifact, it stops a debuff, and you can deal a bunch of damage. I'll take it much more excitingly if I have a reason to. Like Biased Cog, like Hyperbeam. Hyperbeam is one where I'm like, yes, I will take a Core Surge. Hyperbeam allows me to deal a shitload of damage and avoid the loss of 3 focus. That's insane. I love that. But Core Surge has just become that card I'll add no matter what. Gaining 1 artifact is insane in so many different fights, especially in Act 2, I believe. There's not much more to say about Core Surge. Also, getting to that point in the video where I'm losing my ability to speak, so I'm going to try to wrap this up. Creative AI is another card that I have a love-hate relationship with, and it's purely because of that cost, and it's purely because it's very RNG heavy. It is a card where I have to have the right synergies, the right energy base, and the right other cards in my deck, the right relics. It has to be a very, like, correct play for me to want to take Creative AI. Otherwise, it just becomes a dead draw to me. If I get it at the end of Act 1, sometimes going into Act 2, all the fights in Act 2, or a lot of them at least, it requires you to be on your toes when it comes to block and damage, and then Creative AI, you can just never play it, because you're never going to expend a turn playing Creative AI when it might not even be super reliable. Something like Mummified Hand or another reason to have a bunch of random powers added to your hand, then I'll take it. The upgrade makes it obviously more enticing too, but it is one of those powers where I'm like, fuck you, man. Like, I'd love to play you, but you're never viable to play, or you're oftentimes not viable to play. Echoform is one that I'll take kind of no matter what in a lot of circumstances. It's difficult, I suppose, if when you pair it with something like Electrodynamics going into Act 2, because Electrodynamics in Act 2 is very, very valuable, but I think oftentimes the use you're going to get out of Echo Form is more valuable than the use you're going to get out of so many other cards in the game, and it is almost a snap pick. Even when I look at my deck and I go, there's not really many Echo Form targets, I'll still pick it up because I know that being able to double up on Glacier, double up on Buffer, double up on something as simple as a fucking Bullseye or an Aggregate or a Sweeping Beam or a Streamline or a Hologram, like there are some middling Echo Form targets that, to me, justify taking it, even at 3 costs. You just have to be able to be disciplined and manage your deck enough to where that 3 cost of energy is enough to want to play it, I suppose. The upgrade also, it becomes essential because you don't want it to exhaust on you. I mean, it's an expensive card to play in multiple forms, but the power you get from it, especially in the boss fights, is, I mean, you can't not take it. Electrodynamics for me is, it's a card I look for because of its use in Act 2, and it's a card I look for because the AoE that you can create out of your lightning is insanity. I always think about Electro as a card I need before I get into Act 2, though, because if I want to elite farm in Act 2, then Electrodynamics is fantastic. If I want to take a lot of the fights in Act 3, the slimes, the little ball things, the elite with the enemies that spawn around her, Electrodynamics is useful in so many different scenarios, and at 2 cost, it becomes like so nice to play, and the upgrade is obviously nice too. It is almost a snap pick. A lot of the time, it's like, oh shit, Electrodynamics, I gotta take it. It's too useful not to take. Fission is a card I'm still learning to navigate. There are synergies that it has in a lot of different scenarios. It is a card you have to upgrade. You can get use out of the fact that it will remove all your orbs and you can gain energy and draw. You can absolutely get use out of that, but you really want those orbs to evoke. Multiple sources of Fission as well also work fantastically because Fission exhausts. So unless you have the spoon or something, I think being able to evoke all your orbs and then gain energy and draw 1 for each orb you've evoked is a very, very, very powerful effect and works in almost any deck. I feel like there are a few fringe cases where I haven't taken Fission, maybe where I'm really reliant on my orbs and I can't get another upgrade, but I found use with Fission in almost every one of my decks. I just have to learn how to play it perfectly. The order is one thing that I will constantly mess up, and there are a few other things where min-maxing, obviously, with Fission is something that I have to learn. But yeah, I find use for Fission in almost every deck that I'm building. And because it exhausts as well, it's almost like I can just get out of jail free in this turn, and then I don't have to see it again. Hyperbeam is a card I really love, but its drawback is really devastating. If you pair this with Marbles or Beam Cell or any other form of vulnerability on the enemies, insane. And again, the AoE, 34 damage to so many enemies is just like, it'll save you in so many scenarios. And if you draw it turn 1 as well, I mean, you're loving life. You're incredibly happy. Act 1 Hyperbeam, the losing 3 focus is like nothing compared to the damage Hyperbeam will do. You have to be disciplined with it, don't get me wrong, but I feel Hyperbeam is super powerful. I will especially take it if I'm not relying on orbs, if I'm relying on my attacks, if I have all for 1 in the deck, if I'm going for that archetype, Hyperbeam, I'm like, yes, give me Hyperbeam. I don't care about my focus or my orbs at all, give me Hyperbeam. I love this card a lot. There have been a few times where it has not worked for me, but oftentimes it's when I play it and I haven't got my Core Surge out there or any other form of artifact to negate the drawback, but a lot of the times Hyperbeam is just so powerful to me. Machine Learning is one where I go, okay, I get this after an Act 1 boss. I'm like, well, I don't want Meteor Strike. Don't really have, a Snecko Eye or a bunch of energy to be able to afford to play it. Don't really like the idea of a Rainbow or a multicast. Maybe Fission doesn't really fit. Maybe Bias Cog is not what we're going for. Creative AI is too expensive. I'll take a Machine Learning. That's my view on Machine Learning. And I'm happy to make it innate too, if the upgrade comes to it, but it's not my immediate upgrade target. It's just another power that I like to add. The draw is obviously fantastic. And against a few of the other rares in the pool, machine learning can be enticing. But you then stack it up against Ecoform, Buffer, certain scenarios where you want another card over it, and machine learning loses all attraction. So it's got its use, and it stacks up nicely against some other cards, but it's not one that I'm ecstatic to get, essentially. Meteor Strike is one that I will only ever take if I have Snecko Eye. And that's the truth. If I have Snecko Eye, I'll take Meteor Strike. If I don't have Snecko Eye, I'm not taking Meteor Strike. The other way of obviously channel or being able to play Meteor Strike is if I can channel more plasma, or I have a double energy, or I have a turbo. But none of that ever seems to come to pass. I never think about that synergy. I don't like the dead draws of Meteor Strike. It's never a card I'll take unless I have Snecko Eye. That's the truth of the matter. Maybe I'm entirely wrong on that. Maybe that's really dumb of me to think that way, but it's just how I play Defect at the moment. Multicast is interesting because when I look at multicast as a rare, I go, why? There are so many other ways I can evoke my orbs that aren't multicast. There are so many other ways I can evoke and whip my orbs around that multicast isn't that enticing. The only time I will ever take multicast is if I have a darkness or consistent darkness that I can then evoke multiple different times to deal a shitload of damage. That is the only time I'll ever like taking multicast. And again, because oftentimes when you get a choice of a rare, you have multicast stacked up against Electrodynamics or Hyperbeam or Ecoform or Creative AI, and it's like, why the fuck would you take multicast in that context? So multicast is one that I look at and I go, okay, if I've got darkness, give me multicast. But if I don't, no thanks. I mean, Rainbow's interesting. It is an upgrade target for me, absolutely. I think 2 energy to channel a lightning, a frost, and a darkness is very useful. It is another one of those cards where I'm like, I will use Rainbow to push orbs forward. I'll use Rainbow to get a frost orb to the front that I can then dual cast, or a darkness orb to the front that I can then dual cast. That's how I'll use Rainbow, rather than anything else. It is a form of damage and block and more damage. And it's a card that if I have nothing else to play, you're obviously happy to play it, right? You get to evoke some of your orbs, you get to deal some damage, and you replace all your orbs as well, especially if you don't have any more orb generation. But again, it is another card that when you stack it up against some of the other rares in the pool, it kind of sucks, but it's better than Meteor Strike IMO, it's better than multicast in a lot of scenarios, it's better than machine learning in a lot of scenarios. If you don't want to lose 3 focus, then it's better than Hyperbeam in a lot of scenarios. So yeah, I mean, Rainbow's not one of those terrible rares. It's one that I'm happy to take a decent amount of the time. Reboot is interesting. I don't think I would ever take it in a lineup again of other rares that are more useful. But if I see it out in the wild, if I get it as a card reward, if I see it in a shop, I think Reboot's a great pick. Especially upgraded. Reboot can be quite nice. It's like a gambling chip, but it costs 0 and you exhaust it. That's how I see it. Because it costs 0, there's very little stress in playing it. When you play Reboot, you are looking to redo your hand, and you're happy to have a new hand entirely, right? That's why you pick up Reboot. It's useful to give you a better turn, and that's exactly what it does a lot of the time. And because it costs 0 and exhausts, you never have to see it again, right? So for that reason, I mean, Reboot fits in a lot of the different decks that I build. Seek is one that if I see it in a lineup of rares, I have to be able to justify taking it. I have to have targets for Seek, essentially. So if I have an Echo form, obviously I'll take a Seek. If I have a powerful card that I rely on, I'll take a Seek. If I have a reinforced body, I'll take a Seek. It's another one of those cards that because it costs 0, like Reboot, because it exhausts, you'll never see it again. You can take it knowing that it won't clog up your deck. You've got targets for it. It can get you out of a tough spot, and it can set up your fight really nicely. And so for that reason, most of the time, if not all of the time, I'm happy to take Seek. Thunderstrike, the final card in this video, and one that is relatively conditional for me. And the simple condition is, am I generating a shitload of lightning? If yes, think about taking Thunderstrike. Do I have Snecko Eye, and am I also generating a shitload of lightning? Holy fuck, take Thunderstrike. Do I have sources of double energy or turbo, something like that, and I generate a bunch of lightning? Yeah, really good Thunderstrike take. Am I happy with Thunderstrike being a dead draw until it becomes an insane draw later on in the fight? Absolutely. If I can generate enough lightning, Thunderstrike is absolutely a card I'm happy to take. Not always have I grabbed a Ball Lightning, not always a Zap cost 0, not always have I got a Tempest or an Electrodynamics, and so Thunderstrike is less appealing in those scenarios, but if I have enough Lightning Generation, I will take Thunderstrike, because the damage it can do, especially upgraded as well, is very nice. So, that was that. I suppose I should reiterate that I am not a good Slay the Spire player yet. I haven't beaten Ascension 20 on the Defect. This is a video that I wanted to make so that hopefully I can get a better understanding of the cards that I use and don't use, and that, again, if this hits the feeds of any Slay the Spire player that is better than me, more experienced than me, has beaten the Heart on the Defect, has beaten A20 on the Defect, there are going to be timestamps in the description with the cards, and so if you go to a card and I call it shit and you know that it's good, call me out. Call me out, tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm happy to learn. And again, hopefully this is something I can look back on once I've become more familiar with the Defect and look back on it fondly. But yes, if you made it through the entire very long video, then I appreciate it. It was fun to make, if anything. I'm not really fussed if this gets fucking 10 views. It was a fun video to make, and yeah, appreciate it. I'll see you later. Oh, and the stream. I stream Slay the Spire right now because it's really easy to stream, and yeah, I've been enjoying it. Been trying to climb to A20 on all the characters, and I've been loving it. So I'll see you over there if you're interested in joining. But yeah, I'll catch you guys later. Peace.